So are biosimilar medications as safe and effective as biologics? Here, I again want to emphasize we're not as smart as we think we are. What the regulatory authorities really focus on is A, are they as similar as possible to the originator? And B, do they work in one disease? Well, that isn't good enough for me with an evidence-based hat on. The problem is we know there is plenty of evidence that things can be similar but not the same and have very different consequences. Hydrogen cyanide will kill you pretty instantly. Change the hydrogen for an iron molecule, and that's what's called food coloring. So, and clearly that isn't killing anyone, at least we hope not. But the point is, very subtle differences to a molecule can have very different biologic consequences. Now, I don't want to, for anyone to think that biosimilars are dangerous. We know enough to stop that from happening. But to think that they look pretty similar, so they must work the same, is a real problem. And similarly, if they work in rheumatoid arthritis, they must work in Crohn's disease. Yeah, but they may not work as well. In fact, it is true that biologics are actually more of a miracle for the rheumatoid arthritis patient than they are for the IBD patient, sadly, for us as gastroenterologists. We know they don't work as well in our disease. So the moment you start messing around with it, the danger is you will aggravate this problem. So is there any evidence for this? Well, myself and my colleagues, Dr. Benchimol, you'll hear from in the next talk on this series, but also David Armstrong, Kathy Yuan, Ida Fernandez, and Loris Leontiadis. We basically looked at the evidence for CCC and for CAG, and basically what we find is the attitude moving forward to currently from most organizations is that yes, they can be switched, but it should be patient-doctor choice. Europe, despite this suggestion, did go for a wholesale switch and did feel it was safe. But as I will show you, they can't be sure of that. So if we look at the evidence, and I would emphasize the number of people in randomized trials is larger than this, but those specifically with IBD, we have one randomized trial in 220 Crohn's patients. And as far as we can tell, they work similarly. Now, because the numbers are small, there's a lot of uncertainty, but the bottom line is our best guess is Remicade is 5% better, which sounds like a lot, but in medical terms, given that these drugs are not miracle workers, it isn't that impressive, and it is probably safe to switch as Remo, not switch, to start someone on the biosimilar, because in people who are naive to this agent, they seem to work roughly as well. And what really convinced us was actually another study, which isn't as good a design, but was in 5,000 French patients with Crohn's disease, where half were switched at the patient's clinician discretion to Inflectra. Sorry, half started on Inflectra, half started on Remicade, but all being naive. And basically, they were very similar. Now with these big numbers, it's actually flavored Inflectra, but when it's not randomized, you can't be sure. With these small differences, the bottom line is there's no signal for excess harm or any difference in efficacy with these drugs in Crohn's disease in people who are naive to this agent, haven't had it before. Do we start it? So the bottom line is our feeling is it's fine to do this in people who haven't actually had the drug yet. When we look at switching, so people now have been well on this drug for at least 3 to 6 months, often a lot longer, and you switch them from Remicade to Inflectra, that it was that for both of these trials, is there any signal for worry? And the answer is yes, and a qualified yes. So the number needed to harm is 11. So you have to switch 11 people for one to lose response compared to just staying on the original. So most people do fine. That's the first thing to emphasize. So if you just do a wholesale switch in one country from one drug to another, you won't see any difference. This is too small a signal for this to be apparent. This is why you have to have randomized trials. But for the individual patient where this happens, you really, that's not an insignificant thing. Often people have, got there into remission with a lot of struggling. So that 1 in 11 patient is an issue. Although I have to emphasize, we're not certain of that figure, and we never will be, because there's going to be no more randomized trials. And unfortunately, unlike that French live study where there was that allowance of doctor-patient decision, that seems to not be happening in most of Canada. And as I say, has not happened in Europe. So we won't have that level of evidence that we would like, but this is our best guess. Now, is this bad? Is this good? Cost is an issue here as well. These drugs are less expensive, these biosimilars. So, the government who, has to use taxpayers' dollars wisely may feel this is sensible. But I do feel there needs to be a more transparent discussion with patients so that we can decide what is the right way forward. So for a non-medical switching from the originator to a biosimilar, at least as far as Remicade is concerned, we recommended against it, although again, the evidence is very low quality.